Welcome to the MindBod Adventure Pod, where every week we dive into a different practice, a different perspective on life, and you try it out with us. Join us on Substack at mindbodpod.com to watch this episode as a video podcast. And if you want to support our crazy adventures and get fun perks and exclusives along the way, join us as a paid subscriber. Now, onto this week's adventure.
Welcome, John Philip Newell and the thrilling Cami Twilling to the MindBod Adventure Pod. I am your host, Jeff Warren, and with me here,
I'm Tasha Schumann.
my fellow host, Tasha Schumann, and we're happy to have you on. John Philip is the author of The Great Search. We are going to talk about you, John Philip, about this book, the process of moving into a state of searching or being in spiritual exile and the practices that have sustained you. And maybe you could tell us a little bit about what led you to write this book, and we'll take it from there.
Great. So for many years now in my life as a wandering Celtic teacher, I've been very aware of us being in a transition time. Hundreds of thousands, and I suppose probably more like millions of our brothers and sisters who began life within the four walls of inherited religious tradition are no longer there. So increasingly I began to ask, why not? And what is it that we're searching for that isn't being deeply addressed and nurtured within the four walls of religious inheritance as we've known it? So that was really the beginning of this book before I even realized that I wanted to write the book. Just paying attention to what we're searching for and what this moment of transition really represents in terms of the journey of the soul and the journey of earth. And for a long time, I've, in a sense, experienced my own journey as 1 foot within the four walls and very much 1 foot outside religious tradition, identifying very much with spiritual seekers who are not necessarily religious. So that in a sense was the big picture of this book, and particularly asking what are our yearnings, what are the deepest yearnings of our being. And Simone Weil, the young Jewish woman philosopher in France who escaped the capital of France just hours before the Nazi occupation of her homeland, but then died tragically before the end of the war. She wrote in one of her essays, she uses a sentence that has caught my attention and has been important for me for many years. She speaks about the efficacy of desire, the efficacy of desire. And by that she means that getting in touch with the deepest yearnings of our soul is efficacious. That is, it helps bring about what we are longing for. It sort of moves those stirrings of soul up into a greater place of consciousness and clarity. And then from that place of greater consciousness, we can more readily serve these yearnings or embody them in our lives. So I would say that the big picture of the book is, what are the yearnings of the human soul today? And how can we nurture these within ourselves, within one another? How can we serve them? So that's the sort of big picture, and that's very much the focus of the book. But I think it's important to say also that there is a sort of small story in this book, and that is my story. And that isn't because my sort of journey is more important than anyone else's, but I think that my story does reflect that bigger story. So a number of years ago, I decided I needed to relinquish my ordination as a minister of the church. And I realized that I could no longer hold together my emphasis on sacredness of earth and every life form, the sacredness at the heart of every human being, with the sort of foundational creeds and doctrines of Western Christianity, especially as they came to articulation and expression in the 4th century and following, when Christianity got into bed with empire. And increasingly, religion began to serve empire or to serve power. And, I'm referring in part to the 4th century Roman Empire, but I'm also, of course, referring to the British Empire or the American Empire or any nation that has, in a sense, set itself up over against the rest of humanity and against Earth, and has pretended, in a sense, that it could serve its well-being by wronging or exploiting or neglecting the well-being of other nations. I mean, we've seen this in empire again and again over the centuries. It's a version of Make America Great Again. It's a version of we can be well by dominating, by exploiting, by neglecting other nations and other life forms. So a couple of years ago, I realized for my own integrity as a teacher, it was really important to, in a sense, give back my ordination, to say it doesn't fit. And of course, over many, many years in my life, as I've drawn very heavily from the lineage of Celtic wisdom, I have sort of felt very much on the edge of the church anyway. The Celtic tradition historically kept getting into trouble with empire. And nearly all the great wisdom teachers in the Celtic Christian stream, were either excommunicated or deposed or silenced. So that was the stream I was already sort of drawing from heavily. But that sort of giving back of ordination more emphatically put me outside the 4 walls of religion. And I think one of the things that I've been feeling very emphatically, especially since I took that decision, is that deep within our religious inheritance, and I'm speaking in my case from within my Christian inheritance, but deep in our Judeo-Christian scriptures even, there's a very creative tension between the wilderness on the one hand and the priestly on the other. And I think these two really, really need one another. So although I'm very much sort of in the wilderness, as it were, and trying to speak much more from the prophetic voice of call for change and announcing a vision for the way forward, I have a very strong sense of relationship and I would say love with the temple, that is with the family of the temple. That's my family. That's where I came from. That's where I've received a lot of the Jesus wisdom that's important to me in my own vision and writing and life. So I think that the prophetic voice, or the voice from the wilderness, it's only of value if it can keep speaking with love, in a sense, for those who are still within the 4 walls. And the reality is that I think there are lots of people, some of my dearest friends are priests, ministers, still sort of working within the 4 walls. And so many of them are doing really important, great work. But it was important for me at this stage in my life to very clearly say, it's important to give back my ordination.
How much was your interest and experience with exploring your Celtic heritage a part of that? I mean, a big theme of the book is connecting to earth wisdom. I guess you could say our own indigeneity. Could you say a little bit about that Celtic tradition, like what some of its orientations are or how it's inspired the process of writing this book?
Yeah, I would say that the sort of Celtic lineage part of my shaping or inheritance is right at the heart of my decision to let go of my ordination. And I sort of outline the main themes of Celtic wisdom as it's expressed in the Celtic Christian tradition. In my previous book, Sacred Earth, Sacred Soul, in that book there are 9 great teachers stretching from the 2nd century right through to today. And what unites them all, coming from different parts of the Celtic world, is this sense of sacredness of earth and sacredness at the heart of every human being. And what unites them is not sort of ecclesiastical formula or creeds, but the sense that we will be well by coming back into true relationship with earth. and we'll be well by coming back into true relationship with our essence, and to see that our essence, the human soul and earth soul, come from the same wellspring. So yeah, the two are very, very interwoven. And for those with eyes to see, the Great Search is very connected with the previous book. And the work that Cami and I are doing through Earth and Soul stands emphatically in this sort of Celtic lineage of wisdom. And that's where we're sort of drawing from repeatedly, both in our teaching, but also our practices.
Well, that's the perfect bridge. I was going to ask you about, well, how do we get back in touch with those two pieces, the sacredness of the soul, sacredness of the earth? You have specific spiritual practices you do through this group. Can you say anything about them? And we're going to get to explore one of them, but how do you think about the life of the practitioner?
Yeah, this comes in part back to what we were speaking about earlier, and that is paying attention to the yearnings of the human soul. And I think it's as we sort of pay attention to what we're yearning for, and that is things like true relationship with Earth, true relationship with every life form, true relationship with our own depths and with the heart of one another, then I think those yearnings can guide us in terms of, well, what feeds this yearning, both individually but also collectively. So there are certain practices that I'm very committed to as an individual, like early morning meditation as the sun is rising. I mean, that's a transition time every day that humanity over the centuries has found sacred, that sort of transition from darkness into light. And so that sort of practice of silent meditation as the sun is rising is really important to me. And then we find variations of that in our retreat work, in our pilgrimage work. And I feel very sustained by the individual practice, but my goodness, when I can do it with others, it's so much richer. So I really believe in both those two. But Cami, maybe this is a good place for you to step in and speak a little bit about where we look at, how we go about imagining our way into practices and rituals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks. I think one of the things that I'm so struck by in our retreats and the pilgrimage weeks is part of Earth and Soul's, the threefold focus of study, spiritual practice, and compassionate action. So really bringing that spiritual practice is a key part to paying attention to how we are living our lives, how we're speaking out, how we're choosing to act and live in the world. So, like we were talking about earlier, the teaching part being kind of up in our thinking mind, and then the practice moving down to our heart or our gut space of really listening deeply, whether we're listening within, listening to earth in our spiritual practice, whatever that practice might be, but then paying attention through that to what's in between there is our throat, our voice. And so when we bring those two together, it really invites us to pay attention to compassionate action. What does that look like in how we live our lives, how we treat earth, how we treat our, fellow human beings, the creatures. So spiritual practice, yes, taking this seriously, but also remembering how we were as children, how we were free to play and to imagine and to create. So not getting so serious in our spiritual practice, but paying attention to that freedom that comes, like you think of a child playing and creating all sorts of rituals as they're growing up, and inviting people into these practices that they can do anywhere at any time with any group of people, and making them simple. Simple doesn't mean they're not deep and profound. I think sometimes the more simple they are, the more that invites that depth to come forth. So paying attention, in some of our practices, we'll sit with our hand on our hearts out by a tree or a stream or a stone or flower, whatever it is, and just simply say, I'm here and I'm listening. And so your hand is on your heart or your gut, and we're literally listening to earth I think now more than ever, Earth is desperate for us to listen. And that can be part of our way forward of the healing that needs to happen, not something Earth needs to do, but something that we need to do for Earth. We can also sit with our hand on our heart or our gut, speaking our own name and saying, I am here, I am listening. We all hold deep inner wisdom. And I think sometimes we forget that. We look outside of ourselves for someone to tell us what to do. But, you know, in all of John Phillips' writing and teaching, it's not that he's telling you something that you don't know. He's inviting you to remember something that's deep within in all of us, deep within Earth. So I think it's in the first chapter in Thomas Berry, John Phillips writes about how Berry says the universe is so amazing, it must have been dreamt into being. And then he goes on to say, and this is our way forward, is dreaming our way forward or imagining. And so I think spiritual practice really is woven into that, is, you know, dreaming and imagining and playing and practicing our way into knowing more deeply the wisdom that we carry, and also listening with one another in community and taking time to pay attention together. So not just individually, but collectively as well.
And I love your emphasis on simplicity. And I think, you know, as meditators, it's always this dance, this pull between like the instructions of the meditation and the doing of the meditation, or this like desire to get to wherever the meditation or the practice is pointing you and actually being in it. And, you know, we kind of gravitate towards these complex practices or complex ideas, and that just pulls you right out, you know. So this emphasis, on simplicity and just dropping into the body and what is right here, you know, that's really beautiful.
Yeah. There's a ninth prophetic figure that I draw from in the book, the Scottish poet Kenneth White. And I always like to slip in a few Scots into my books. And Edwin Muir is not necessarily someone that a lot of people will know about, but he's a very beautiful poet of soul. But one of the things he says something like, truth is not too complicated for expression. Truth is too simple for expression. So sometimes it's especially when we find a simplicity of utterance or a simplicity of action or a simplicity of ritual, it feels like we're really getting closer to the heart.
I think that's exactly why it's dismissed by so many intellectuals.
Yeah, because they can't get into it.
They think value means complexity, but when it's really, it's the inverse, you know, and the fact that these things are so simple, that's why they're true for everyone, or can be true for everyone. They're accessible for everyone, but people look down their nose from a kind of intellectual tradition at that, and it's so backwards.
It's funny, in my tradition, which is the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, the beginner texts are the longest. They're like 900 pages. They really like spell things out and drag it out, you know, step by step. And the more advanced you get, the more it's just a couple pages, right? Which is the complete opposite of what we do in the West. We, you know, here's your little beginner 3 pages. And then when you're doing your PhD, it's like, you know, the numbers and words are swirling around your head, you know.
Yeah. Which is just a blank page.
Yeah.
You've arrived.
You arrived.
Nowhere.
Yeah.
Everywhere. Nowhere and everywhere.
Yeah. Cami, one of the things I was thinking of as you were speaking is especially about Thomas Berry and our capacity to imagine and dream. I was remembering that one of Thomas Berry's important points that I've really valued as well is that meditative ritual is, you know, part of the way of playing the way forward. And I think we sometimes think, certainly I used to think, that ritual was a sort of representation of what we'd already figured out. And, you know, we see what the truth is, and now we're going to symbolize it through ritual. And Thomas Berry has this very different approach that I think is really important and is much more childlike, and that is, let's play our way into ritual as a way of moving towards greater clarity of seeing.
That's like we've begun a new moon ritual where we kind of get together and literally do that. We just sit around and dream. What do we want to do? Like, what are we excited about? What's unfolding for us?
We dream into the future, but no, that is such a great point. I have never thought of that in terms of ritual, we think of ritual as looking to the past, but really it's an enactment of what can be in the future. That's a very different feeling, engaging in a ritual that way.
Yeah. And I think it's so much truer to the child as well.
And it can be, of course, bi-directional. You can be honoring the past even as you're enacting this future.
It's like a thread, to carry from the past and building into the future.
Wonderful. Well, Cami, are you gonna shall we pay our visit?
Yes.
Wonderful. So this little ritual spiritual practice I'll invite you into is, again, holding this as a simple practice, but listening deeply to how this speaks within us. So this is a ritual of light, and I have a candle that I'll be holding up for us to use. Oh, great. And you have candles.
If you're listening, you can grab a candle. That's what we're all doing. We're kind of lighting candles right now. If you're watching, take a sec, go grab one.
Can people look outside at the light outside, or look at any light source, or is a candle?
Yeah, in fact, I'll just say this before we begin. We were doing a retreat in Michigan, and we were outside, and we wanted to do the ritual of light. And at first we were thinking, oh, we got to find a candle somewhere. And then suddenly we thought, the sun is shining on us. Why are we looking for a candle? I mean, here is light in its most primal source, keeping us warm. So if you're somewhere where you can look out to the sun to do this practice, certainly.
Careful not to burn out your eyeballs.
Yeah. So I'll hold the candle up for us, and you have your candles. And if you have a place you can set your candle, because I'll be inviting you to use your hands, and I'll hold up the candle for everyone if you don't have a candle with you. But this is a ritual of light. You can practice this anywhere, at any time, with anyone. And it's just an invitation to be aware of the light that is everywhere. So the first time I'll invite us, just placing your hands either symbolically over this candle or the one you have, or to the sun, and then bringing your hands to your eyes as we allow this to express our yearning to see light in earth and in every living creature. And then bringing our hands back to the light and to our hearts, that we may remember the light in earth and in every creature, that is also the light that is at the heart of our being. So we'll do that again. And after we do this again, I will invite us just into a few moments of silence to really allow that to sink down into our being. And we can just sit with that for a few moments, and then I'll invite us into the second part of the practice. So first, our hands to the light and to our eyes, and allow it to express our yearning to see light in earth and in every living creature. And then placing our hands back to the light and to our hearts, that we may remember the light in earth and in every creature is also the light that is in our own being. Now again, bringing your hands back to the light. And again to our eyes, to express our yearning to see light in one another and in every human being. And then back to the light, and placing our hands on our hearts, that we will remember the light in every human being is also the light that we carry within our being. So we'll do that again one more time, and then pause to allow that to sink deep into our being. Our hands to the light and to our eyes, to express our yearning to see light in every human being and in one another. And back to the light and to our heart, that we may remember that this light in every human being is also the light at the heart of our being. So let us pause in silence. And moving again to place our hands to the light and to our eyes, with an awareness of our yearning to look for the light deep within our own being. And then back to the light and to our hearts, that we may feel and know this light deep within us. So again, placing our hands to the light and to our eyes, that we may look for the light at the depths of our own being. And back to the light and to our hearts, that we may know this light deep within us. And let us pause again to sit with this, allowing it to sink deep into our being. Now hearing these words, seeking awareness. As morning mist scatters from among the hills, so my soul longs to see again both light and dark, both height and depth, the one and the many, my life and every life, intertwined, and each a unique manifestation of the divine. As morning mist scatters from among the hills, so my soul longs to see again. When you're ready, you can open your eyes and bring yourself back into this space together.
Vito, Cami, thank you. It's so interesting. I feel like so many meditations and practices involve this process of remembering that you don't need to go anywhere. You start out and there's this anticipation or a waiting or an expecting or a judgment about something. And then, you kept very skillfully inviting us again and again, it's right here. Mm-hmm. And then for me, there's this downward drop. Can I let myself be in the quiet without needing it to be any different? And that's the place to be.
Yeah, for me, it's like this tether to this complete simplicity, like this complete openness of just the heart. And you get a flavor of how simple and totally all right it is. Like just to be here. And then the mind is like this, like a little fly that's like, ooh, I could make something of this. Like, let me get into the physics of this flame and the warmth that is in my heart and also in others. And there's this like desire to just like explain and make something of it in story. And then you just get pulled back to the tether. And it's like the difference between them, even just in the body, is so stark, this like vast simplicity or this like buzzing, fuzzing, entity. It's really quite wonderful watching that just come to rest finally. And also just I kept my eyes open, resting on the flame, and realized I kind of started meditating when I was quite young, at like 13 or 14, I had no idea. I didn't even know if it was called meditation. I just had this desire to do it. And when I first started, it was always with the candle flame. I would light a candle and just like sit there when no one was at home and do my weird like sitting practice or whatever it was. And I since haven't done it for decades, but it was such a beautiful return.
Yeah, I think that's such a great example of what we were speaking about earlier about as a child or a teen, we know there's something in us that knows what we're longing for, and we just do the practice. We don't need somebody to tell us, here's how to do this. Here's all these, 17 steps to make this happen. We just sit down and we do these things. It's a gift that we can remember that and invite ourselves not to go backwards to that, but to dream the way forward, being inspired by that, that really innocent wisdom of the child.
Yes, I remember reading a book called Born Contemplative, and a wonderfully simple thesis that the child knows about contemplation until, in a sense, the child is educated out of those times of stillness. And Cami, I hope you don't mind me mentioning that one of the first times I met you, I knew I was in the presence of a contemplative because you shared with me the story as a little girl of sitting in a closet with a little Buddha bank, a little sort of piggy bank that was a Buddha. And what were you thinking? You wouldn't have been thinking your way into contemplation. You were just doing that as a child. I've always loved that.
Yeah, you've outed my story that I haven't really told many people.
It's so beautiful.
Yeah, it was just our coat closet in our family home. And there was this, a Buddha piggy bank that my grandfather had made. I don't know why. I mean, we didn't, at that time in my life, I had really no connection to Buddhism. Now I have more connection to that. But yeah, I love just sitting in the quiet, dark space with the Buddha. And, what draws a 5 or 6-year-old to do that?
That is so funny. I used to do the same thing. Like I think there's this natural longing for calm and quiet. and a closet is a great place to get it.
Mm-hmm.
Just like crawl into the closet. Or I used to just like find a sunbeam. There's like this time in the day where the sun would shine in, and everyone else would be busy doing something else, like cooking dinner or washing dishes or something, and I would just lay on the carpet in the sunbeam and like just totally nothing going on upstairs. Just being. I feel like that's so naturally human. And you were saying, that we're kind of socialized away from that. And I think that so many of us can touch into that. For me, I used to hide it. Like I used to only do it when other people were not around, so I wouldn't have to answer to it. Like, what are you doing? Get off the ground or get out of the closet. And then when I became older and started looking for books, I'd hide the books under my bed. And, I just didn't want these conversations with grownups, because you have this sense that this is not what people are doing. This is like a practice that I guess when I get older won't happen anymore, or I have to hide it.
This actually is a perfect bridge just to ask you. There's sort of a final thing I wanted to ask about, which was the practice of pilgrimage, which is to, in a sense, seek out those places where we can connect to those longings. And the two of you I know host, well, you especially, John Philip, the Iona Abbey. You have a long-standing relationship with, which is a very famous, beautiful, rugged, old, early center of Christianity out in an island in the middle of nowhere in Scotland. And people come and make pilgrimage to this place. And can you say a little bit about that? Like, in particular, I'm just curious, what is the practice of pilgrimage? What does it look like?
Yeah, maybe before I do that, or as a sort of way into that, Tasha, your childhood experience of lying, watching a beam of light, this relates, very much to, again, chapter 9 in the book, and drawing on Edwin Muir. He wrote an autobiography of his own life, but in many ways it reads like an autobiography of the human soul. It's like he's offering us a glimpse through his own journey of what this essential journey of reconnecting with light is about. And he remembers, the first memory that he thinks he has in his life was of lying in a cradle. So he would have been, just an infant. And he has this memory of watching a beam of light coming into his bedroom. And one of the things he says about that moment is, it was as if time had not yet begun, like he's tapping into this weaving of time and eternity. And, the title that I give to chapter 9 is Seeking Faith. And for someone like Muir, it wasn't about seeking faith. So often we think of faith as being attached to propositional statements about God. I have faith because I believe certain things. And for him, seeking faith or living into faith is about being faithful to this light, this immortal shining that he says can be seen in every human being, in every life form. And so certainly for me, and I think for many others, that's part of what pilgrimage to Iona is about. And George MacLeod, the founder of the modern day Iona community, wanted to speak of Iona as a type of thin place where there's a thin separation between time and eternity, between heaven and earth, between the divine and the human. And really importantly, he went on to say, and that's not to say that every other place is thick. It's to say that on Iona we more readily access this shining or this light that is deep in all things. So that when we then return from the sort of pristine beauty and quality of light on Iona to the challenging places of our lives and of the world, we do so remembering to look for that same light that is everywhere present. So I think that that's a significant aspect of Iona's history and what it is for many people. What is it that makes a place like Iona sacred? I think some would say that there's a quality of spiritual energy and the physical light there that's really extraordinary. I think there's also this sense that, people have been coming there with open hearts and open minds, and it's almost like an accumulative energy because of the prayer and the searching and the open heart of many who have been before us. During my time on Iona, had 4 continuous years there. One of the things that has always struck me is that many people say, when I stepped on this island, I began to weep. And I think, Carl Jung says, when we weep, something in the salt sea of life's origins is stirring in us again. Something very primal, something very deep is flowing again. And people have this experience, and the vast majority of them, of course, don't know that in the 6th century, when Columba developed Iona as a place committed to the Christ mystery and the light that is deep in all things, one of the rules of his monastic community was pray until the tears come. Pray until you get in touch with that sort of deep flow. So a pilgrimage week on Iona consists of various aspects, but the island itself is really a significant part of it. So in pilgrimage weeks, we don't over-program. We don't want to be inside all the time speaking about spirituality or seeing, but actually being on the island is a really significant part of it. The times of meditation together early in the morning, for instance, are really important. There's a teaching that is offered every day that I do, and I think that that's part of bringing our head and our mind into this searching for light. Then there are meals together, sharing the food of the earth. Our pilgrimages are hosted by the Columba Hotel, which has its organic garden. So the actual place of the pilgrimage is consistent with the themes that we're committed to. So I think that there are these many aspects that really make Iona again and again a place of deep illumination and often tears and often real challenges, because someone like George MacLeod, and this is much deeper also in the Celtic world, that as Cami was saying earlier, it's not just about study and spiritual practice, it's about accessing wisdom and spiritual practice in order to be stronger for the work of compassionate action. So it's not about staying on Iona, it's not about retreating from the places of darkness and real struggle and torment in the world. It's about being strengthened to re-engage.
I always find that after retreat, there's just this kind of afterglow. You can feel it kind of trailing off as time goes, like you filled up your cup and now you're kind of using that full cup in the world. So to me, it's more important to go regularly than it is to do like long stints for that exact reason, because it's kind of like the 2 poles of your life, interacting with the world and then this kind of spacious contemplative space.
That's the rhythm, the withdraw and return. Yeah. Withdraw and return. That's the classic rhythm of retreat and practice. Well, beautiful to get to spend this time with the two of you. How contemplative. It really put me into that space, and I think it's suitable that we're finishing talking about making the pilgrimage, because in a sense your whole book is about really the search for connecting to those longings and the fulfillment of those longings, and we're all on a kind of pilgrimage, I guess. Thank you, friends.
Thank you.
So good to be with you. And we look forward to welcoming you to Iona.
I would like to go. It's already had been on my map. I mean, the Camino, there's some spots in Japan, and Iona I had heard about, and now you've fleshed it out a little bit for me. So hope it does well with 2-year-olds and 5-year-olds. Disruptive for the pilgrimage.
It's a very child-friendly island.
Oh, wonderful.
Wow. To be continued. Thank you, friends.
Thank you. Blessings.
Thanks for adventuring with us. Pop over to mindbodpod.com and let us know in the comments how this episode landed for you. Don't forget to subscribe for new episodes every week. And if you want to support our crazy adventures, get fun perks and exclusives along the way, join us as a paid subscriber. See you next week.